Hello and welcome to another fine tutorial where we'll be talking about another concept in C called nested loops. It's a pleasure to do this once again with you. I do hope that at the end of this tutorial, you would gain a lot, understand the core concept of how nested loop works, and generally how to think more like a programmer and a problem solver. My name is Bright from B-Wave ICT, and once again, welcome. So far, if you've been following this playlist, this series of videos from the C part 1, where we did talk about very simple things like printing of shapes and numbers, down to where we started getting user inputs, where we started looking at functions such as the printf, the scanf, the header files, and even up to the if and else statements in and now loops in C. You would recall that the whole essence of these tutorials to help you think more like a problem solver. So the reason why we are doing these tutorials is not just to help you say I can program in C, or I know how to use C, or I know how to use or if statements, but to teach you how to now think, solve problems. So all these various concepts that we are learning are just tools that you have in your disposal. Then when you have issues, you look at these tools, your toolbox, your memory, and you think which one will be more suitable for challenges like this. And so today we are going to look at another tool you can use for challenges, and that is nested loop. We'll define what is nested loop, why we need it, and how we write nested loops. So let's get started. You will recall that from the very first video of this series in this playlist, if you've not watched the first video, you could simply go back. The link in the description below, you can see it on your screen, or you could just check this playlist, and the very first video titled C for Absolute Beginners Part 1 would really explain to you all what we've talked about previously, and you can follow it serially up until nested loops. In the first video, you would recall we did something like this. We went ahead to print out shapes and this one here has the resemblance of an L shape in C. And we did this using just a simple function called printf. You would also recall that I went ahead to print another shape. This one looks more like a right angle in C. And we did this using just this function, printf statement. So with only this tool at day 1, our first day of this video, you were able to do things like this. And now that you have more tools at your disposal, you will now be able to do even much more than you've previously done before. So what's that much more we can do? If you recall the last video where we did talk about loops, we talked about what loops could have done for us. So for example, if you have a simple statement to print out star 5 times like you have here, a loop could have done this for you. So we want to print out this star here 5 times, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But why would we use loop when in fact you can just simply say printf and star, then here put your new line, and if I copy this and paste it down about 5 times, I would have exactly what I've been asked to do. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you try to run this code now, you would have exactly this. And you would in fact be correct because you've done what you're asked to do, which is print out star 5 times. So why do we need loop, and where does loop come in? This program is all correct and nice and fine here. But what if you're asked to print out star 50 times? You will now need to copy this printf up to 50 times. And if you're asked to print out star 500 times, then to print out a simple star like this, you will need 500 lines of code. And at that time, even you would feel that there probably has to be a better way to do this than just writing printf star about 500 times. What if we don't know the number of times we want to print out the star? We're asked to get it from the user. How would you be able to print it using printf? And so even though this solution works correctly for 5 times, there has to be a better way. That would bring me again to the topic about using tools and thinking more like a problem solver. So at this stage, when writing codes, you should not just focus on getting the job done, getting the answer. Because if you look at this example, this code using printf gets the job done. It gets the answer correctly. But it leaves us with a challenge. And that is, if we should change this 5 to 500, our code will be too long. And so when writing code, it's not just about you or anyone else getting the answer correctly. There also has to be some pattern. So you have to look at the best method to get the answer. And so not just in C, but in every other programming language, there are methods that are more suitable to perform a certain task than the others. And looking at this method, it will not be the best or the most suitable method to perform the task on our hands. So the next time you are given a problem to solve, you want to look at the methods that would be much more suitable, the method that would be best to use to solve that problem. And so if you should think about a better or even the best method to solve a problem like this, to print out star 5 times, how might you have done it? Now, this is the thought process. We've just identified that we can use printf, but it will not be the best method. So it's up to you now to look for another method that is suitable, that would be a better method than the printf statements. And from what we've discussed last time, or from all the concepts we've discussed so far, you may start thinking of concepts like an if statement to say if the number is less than 5, print out star, else print out nothing. You might start thinking about an if statement to solve that problem. And that would be a much more better method than using this printf only. But what if you think further, more not just an if statement, but you continue to think through all the concepts we've learned so far? You would see that another method that is suitable or even better than the if statement is to use a loop, because a loop goes through a certain condition as long as that condition is false. So it goes through each character, each letter, each iteration in that condition as long as that condition is false. And so maybe a loop would have been a much more better method than using an if statement or the printf here. Now that we've established that a loop would have been a better method, recall how to write a loop to print out something like this? Well, let's just briefly go through it again. So I could call this loop1.c, and in here I can have my default files. You are already familiar with things like this. So how do I solve this problem with a loop? Maybe I could use a for loop and say for int I equal to 0. And as long as I is less than 5, we want to perform a certain, we want to increase I and then perform a certain condition, which would be in our printf statement. So we printf star a certain number of times. And now we can return 0 after our program is successful. So what did we do here? Just a reminder from what we discussed last time on loop. We created a variable I and set it to 0. And then we said as long as I is less than 5, remember we're asked to print this loop 5 times. So since I is starting from 0, count from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's 5 times. If we turn this 0 here to 1, we will now do something like as long as I is less than or equal to 5. But since we are starting from 0, we just stop as long as it's less than 5. Counting from 0 to 5 will give you about 5 stars. Now, when we run this, we can keep our fingers crossed confidently that this program should in fact compile and run just exactly the way we expect to print out star 5 times. And yes, it does that. And so this would have been how to use a for loop to print out something like this. Just look at this example. We've thought about the best solution. You could go ahead and write an if statement to print out something like this. If I less than or equal to 5, print star, new line. Else, print nothing. And using that method would have been not just more, it would have been very, very stressful to you, the programmer, to even write out that. A simple for loop here is better. And so if we change this 5 now to 500, remember we did say one of the reasons why the printf, only using printf, was a bad option here was because if we add 500 to this star. Now let's have 500. Let's go ahead, run our code. Compile that, and then when I run it, you can see 500 gets printed out almost immediately, 500 times, and you can go on and on and on. And so this was a better method. Now that we've started talking about methods, the better method, not just any kind of method. So it's not just if it would work or if it won't work, but which is a better method. Let's think now. You are given a problem similar to this first one. In this first one, you were asked to print out 5, a star 5 times. And we said this would be a wrong method. And we established that a better method would have been a for loop. With this now, let's look at another example that is similar to the first one. So you are now asked to print out a square of 5 stars. Remember the difference between this first and second problem we are having here. In our first problem, we're asked to print out star 5 times. But this time, we have to print out a square of 5 stars. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And also we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what method do you think would be a better method to print out square 5 times? You could come up with for loop again. You could do the printf statement. For example, you can write this and you would in fact be correct. So let's call this now loop2.c, and in here you can simply say star, 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 and star, like 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can try to run this. So what we just did here was to, instead of printing out 1 star, we put 5 star in our printf state. And then we can decide to run this code. And watch what the output would be. Remember, this is our problem. Print out a square of 5 stars. And now let's try to run this. Okay, so you see that we clearly have about, let's run that again. Yes, so you see we have about 5 stars, 5 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And for each of these 5 stars, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 also. So we've just solved our problem just like that, using another for loop. In fact, the same for loop we used, we just modified it to give us the results. But will that be the best method? Well, you could argue yes. What if we are asked to print out 50 stars? So rather than having 5, we want to have up until 50. So I want to go 5, 10, 15, 20. How would you do this? Using this modification method, you will now have to type 50 stars in here. And if you're asked to change it to 100 stars, you have to come back to your printf statement and put 100 stars. Does that method seem like the best method to use to solve a problem like this? I doubt. It would be almost the same thing as doing something like a simple printf and then a new line. So it would be the same thing as we copying this printf here, copy, and then we can copy this, and then we paste it about 5 times. And if you run this code, you are going to have 5 stars again. So both methods, both modification methods, whether we modify our for loop or we just use a simple printf, would give us the same output. But if we are asked to do this 50 times, we would have more problems than this. It would be stressful for you to write, or you would just need to be copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste upwards in 500 times. That doesn't really seem to me like the best way. So what is the best way? You can pause this video now and try to think through all what you've learned. If there's a better way than these 2 methods we've just talked about. But if not, then resume the video and see what better way we could have done this. All right. Did you come up with any idea? Maybe or maybe not. But now let's look at this method together. It will bring us to our today's topic, a nested loop. So what's a nested loop in C? A nested loop is simply a loop inside of another loop. One loop inside another loop. And so this is a loop. Let's go back to our example, the first one we had. This is a loop. To have another loop inside of this loop would be a nested loop. So what do we mean by another loop? This is our first for loop. And instead of having a printf here, we'll now remove this printf and put another for loop and say int j equal to 0. As long as j is less than 5, we want to increment j. this second loop now, so we have our first for loop, and then we have the second for loop. This thing alone is nested loop in C. So next time when you hear about nested loop, it's not something so complicated. It's just a loop inside it. But how do we use this nested loop? Remember I said all these concepts, loops, if else, switch statements, functions, all the concepts you learn in C are tools that help you to solve problems. And now we have a problem on our hands. That problem is to print out this. How do we use our nested loop now to solve this problem on our hands? So think about it now. We've just defined the syntax for a nested loop. We first had a for loop, and inside that for loop, another for loop. What do we do now? We want to print out star. So we can just write our printf statement here and say star, and this would in fact print our statement for us. So you want to try this first. Remember, I want to break down the process, and let's see what we'll get. We have our first loop, then we have our second loop, and then we have a printf. Let's see what we have if we run this. Remember, this is our problem, and this is our proposed solution. Time to check if this our proposed solution is going to work out well for us. So I've compiled, and now let me try to run it. Watch what happens. Hey, so this is what we have. Definitely not what we're looking for. But if you notice, it's quite different from this. So our for loop wasn't wrong, but our for loop could not do what we want. Instead, it's printed out everything same line. So if you were asked to look at that code result and check what is wrong, what is the problem with that code, would you be able to do that? All right, look at it this time and look at what is wrong. This is what we wanted to print out, and then we had a nested for loop, and we got something like this. So what is the problem? First, let's count out what we have. If we have a 5 star 5 times, what would that be? So this is 5 times 5. That would give us 25. So this is 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 stars. Let's count out what we have here now. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. We have the same number of stars, 25 stars here, 25 stars in our output. But our code is still wrong because the two results are different. So what's the logic? What is the problem? What's the thing that we have to tamper with or modify a little to be able to print out this? Instead of this line printing out on this one, give a new line. So for every five star it's printed out, it's give a new line to the next. In this one, in our results. But in our code, there was no new line. So the problem with our code is not the for loop, it's not the nested loop, but it's the new line. Now, I spent time explaining the problem with our code because for all you'll be doing in any programming language of your choice as you solve problems would be to look at the problem at hand and to think about the thought process to solve it. And so when you have these issues, the first thing you want to do is think, what would be the best method for me to solve this problem? The first thing to do is not to go back to the look at the error or look at the results and look at what you are expecting, and then think about how you could better solve this problem. Now let's go back to our code and see how we can modify our code to print out a new line after every 5 iterations. One thing you could have decided to do was put a new line here. But would this work? Well, following our first for loop, this should work, right? Or maybe not. So let's try to compile this code now and see what we would have. When we run it, we see that instead of it printing out a new line after every 5 lines, it just printed out a straight new line for us. And we have a very long list of 25 new lines. So it's just 1 star new line, 1 star new line, 1 star. So we are still left with this problem. How do we modify that code in such a way that it will print out a new line after every 5 star? Let's go back again. Code. So it's clear now that this cannot be the solution. A new line here would not be. So where do we have our new line? Let's look at this. Put a new line after your inner for loop. Let's say new line here. And let's try to run this. And this is what we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For each of this line, we have 5. Similar to what we have here. But not exactly the same. For example, look at what we have here. We have star, 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 star 5 times. But in here, we have star is space, star space, star is space. How do you modify this code to print out a space this time? You see how we've taken this step by step, process by process. We're not rushing into solving it. We're asking ourselves, how do we do this? How do we do that? What steps do I need to start this process? What steps should I use to solve this problem? When you have issues, when you have challenges, code errors, and the rest, this should be exactly how you fix them. Look at what steps you need to solve which problems. That would be the formula to fixing any problem in any programming language. Once again, this programming language, whether it's C, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's Python, C#, are all tools to solve problems. The problems would always be there, and this problem. So we are just looking at how to use a tool in C called nested loops to solve this problem. Now let's go back to our code and think about how we could put a space. There are a couple of ways to do this. But one simple one would be that after each star, it should put a space here. So in our printf, we could simply say star space. Now let's try this and check if it will work. So we have star space, another star space, the rest, which is exactly what we are asked to print out here. I don't know if this is clear. Now, if you are asked to even tamper with this, you could do something like this. And now it will give out a space in all the first line, just the way it is here, where we had a space in all these first lines. But let's go back to this code now to review what we've done, so that even though it's clear, it could be much more clearer. This is our for loop. And if we should remove all these other for loops, would be left with just this first for loop, which we had. Remember, we use this first for loop to print out something like this here. Now let's look at it again. We have two variables, int I and int j. int I here, and then int j in our second for loop. There are a couple of ways we could have done this. We could have written the variables here, int I and int j. But rather than write these things in 2 lines, we could have just simply done something like this. Int I, j equal to 0. So this would, in fact, turn our int I and j to be equal to 0, 2 variables. And in here, we could now have written something like I and initialize this like this. I and then a semicolon. And it would still work out fine for us. But just to stick to something you are already used to, let's use these methods that we've been using so far. So here I'm going to remove these 2 variables, and inside our for loop we have them. So it's I is equal to 0, and as long as 0 is less than 5, it would look at this second for loop. So I don't know if you understand this. First off, this is the first for loop. As long as 0 is less than 5, I is equal to 0. And we are saying I less than 5. So we are in effect saying 0 less than 5. And look at this condition. Is 0 less than 5? Yes, that's true. The condition is true. So rather than move on, it would look at this for loop. So 0 less than 5, correct. This second for loop said we have a variable called j equal to 0. Is 0 less than 5 in our second for loop? Yes, 0 is less than 5. It would go down to the next line, which is printf a star. Once it's printf this star now, it would increment j++. So what it does here is, once again, it looks at this condition first. I is equal to 0. Is I less than 5? Yes, it's going to come here to the next condition and say j is equal to 0. Is 0 less than 5? Yes. What's the next condition? Printf star. After it's printf star, it would do this, increments +1. So this j that is 0 here would now turn to 1. So rather than having j equal to 0, in its second iteration, it will turn to 1. So first it was 0. After printing out star, it would fulfill this condition, ++, and it will turn to 1. Is 1 less than 5? Yes. It's going to go ahead and print another star. It's going to increment again. Is 2 less than 5? So this j will turn to 2. And with here, it will now be saying is 2 less than 5. Yes. It would print the third star. Alright. It would continue. Is j will now increment to 3. And this will now be 3. Is 3 less than 5? Yes. So it would have printed 0, 1, 2, 3. It would increment again to 4. Is 4 less than 5? Yes. And it will print out another star. And finally, it will look at this loop. J will now be 5. Is 5 less than 5? No. So it would, since 5 is not less than 5, it will leave this loop. It will leave this loop. So by that time, you will have 0 here, element 0, element 1, element 2, 3, and 4. It will leave this loop since 5 is not less than 5. And it would go back to its first loop. But its first loop has a condition. So all these things that has happened in between, inside this loop, falls under this condition is 0 less than 5. These things would happen. As long as 5 is less than 5, before it leaves this loop finally, it would do this. Printf a new line. So it would exit this line and printf or add a new line. And after adding the new line, it's going to go back to this first loop. At this time, this loop at 0 would have changed to 1. So I will now be 1. Is 1 less than 5 in its first loop? Yes. Once 1 is less than 5, it will enter this for loop again. In this for loop that says j. Remember, j was equal to 5 in our first loop, where I was at element 0. So where this was 0, we are done. J is now equal to 5, and 5 is not less than 5. But when I now changes to 1 here in our for loop, j returns back to 0. And so we have something like is 0 less than 5 again for this j. Is 0 less than 5? Yes. It's going to printf another new line. It's going to complete this process again till 0 turns to 5. This j here becomes 5. It's going to print a new line and go back. This I1 now will now change to 2. So is 2 less than 5? Yes. It's going to do this again and again and again until this j turns to 5. Is 5 less than 5? No. And it's finally going to exit our program, return 0, and give us the output. That is an explanation of how it works. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Was that clear enough? If no, please leave your questions in the comment section and help me do something. If you are enjoying this video, if you've learned anything new so far, kindly subscribe to this channel and drop a positive comment so that other people that also have problems such as this would see your comments and they will know that this video can help them understand for loops. Thank you so much. So that was it about how we were able to print out this square 5 times using a nested loop or a loop inside it. Recall what I said, that all these are just tools, right? So let's run this one more time for the last time. And yes, we have one simple problem now. We have one simple problem. Yeah, we forgot to close this thing. So we had an infinite loop because we didn't do something right. All right. Recall what I've said. All these are tools. Whether I use a loop, you go ahead to use an array. You decide to be a genius and use an if statement. It's all up to you. Or you decide to use that for loop without using nested loop and you just do space, space, space like we did before. Or you decide to use printf. All these are methods, but some are more accurate than the others. And soon enough, when we'll be talking about big O notations in C and algorithms and how fast your algorithm ran, how many milliseconds it took, how many seconds, and things like that, you understand better why it is that it's not just important for you to give a correct output. The way you write your output is also very important. Just like everything in life, it's not just enough to pass a message. The method, the manner, the tune in which you use to pass the message is also very important. And that's why I'm using a very nice and appealing tool to tell you to kindly subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. And if you have questions, please leave them in the comment section. Just to add, if you're looking at doing software engineering, but you also want to learn web development and not just the software terminal part of the engineering, you want to do things like websites that you can relate to it for mobile phones, for your system, for TV size. You're looking to learn how to do things like that, interact with the front end and back end, receive emails and the rest. any kind of website you want to learn at all, you're looking at learning it for the next 3 months, I have a one-on-one training class with you to teach you website development from start to finish. The same method I'm using to teach this concept will be the same. Teach you so that you can understand it and solve problems on your own. If you're interested, send me a message that you really want to learn this website development. This 2023, let's focus a whole lot on this tech skill. All right, back to our loop in C. So once again, all these are just tools. Now, we use a for loop. I keep emphasizing that these are tools. You know, when you have tools to do something, you can choose between different kind of tools to actually do something. So, for example, if you wanted to charge your phone, like I'm charging mine now, if you wanted to charge your phone, you have a couple of options. For example, if your battery is not inbuilt, you can decide to remove your battery and use something like a desktop to charge your battery alone without charging the phone. That's a tool. Or you could decide to buy a charger like this to charge it and plug it directly to a wall socket. That's another tool. You could also decide to have a power bank and charge your phone. That's another tool. All these are tools. Which method you use would eventually charge your phone, but some are much more faster than the others. For example, if you get a new charger and you plug it directly to the socket, would be really much more faster than having to use a power bank to charge your phone. And so in this C tool, we can use another tool inside these nested loops to fix this problem. And that is a nested do while loop. So what we just used to fix this problem, the tool we just used was a nested for loop. All right. We can use something called a nested do while loop to fix our problem. Let me, for the last time, show you how a nested for loop looks like. So this was our nested for loop. And I could even remove this return statement from here, because this is a void function in reality. It takes returns really nothing. This was all we needed to do to fix this problem using a nested for loop. So we had line 1, 2, 3, 4, and probably 5 main lines, because we can just put all these brackets in this line. Now, let's use this do while loop. And I would ask you which one you prefer. If it's the for loop tool, nested for loop, or the do while loop tool, which one do you prefer to solve this kind of problem? All right, let's now open a file called firstloopwhile.c, and here is our next do while loop. Solve these same problems. We are looking at this from the start, from just looking at it like this, it's already looking vague. But let's try to explain what we did here. So if you check, for our for loop, we had two variables, it's I and it's j, and we initialize them to 0, but we call those variables inside our for loops. So we have something like for bracket open int I equal to 0. Here though, we are initializing our loop first, our variable first. The variable is I, the value is 0. And then we say a do while loop. You know how the do condition works. Do bracket open, and these are the conditions it will do while I is less than 5. So this is its I. And here we are saying do all of this while I is less than 5. So I is 0. We are saying continue to do these things the rest things that are inside here, why this I is less than 5. So if I becomes 1, if I becomes 2, if I becomes 3, or if I becomes 4, it will continue to do these things in here. But once I that is 0, once it becomes 5, it would stop doing it. Now, inside our first do loop, we have another variable called int j equal to 0. And we have another do loop. So this is a nested do while loop. So it means a do while loop inside another do while loop. Me explaining it alone, I can tell that someone somewhere watching this video is thinking, I think I'm okay with using the for loop too. Just like me having to see this fast charger here now, and I see a power bank with a very old cord. And I'm like, no, I think I'm comfortable using this fast charger. Now, talking about tools, your eye is really a tool you want to take care of in programming. And so these glasses that I'm wearing are not for formality at all. They are called blue light glasses. And if you look at it, it's actually white. But when it's reflecting, it reflects blue. And so if I wear it, it looks as if it's blue. These glasses would help protect your eyes from the rays that are coming from these TV screens. So some of these glasses can save you pains in the future and even having a serious eye challenge. This simple glass here. Some claim to be blue light glasses, but in fact, they don't protect anything. To get authentic blue light glasses, there's a method you use to check and all of that. It turns out I've already checked for you, and if you want to get a blue light glass like this, I really have someone whose all the glasses are very authentic. They will not only save you from the stress of having to strain your eyes now, but also from future problems that may come as a result of looking at these screens for a long time. So if you want to get them, please click on the link below to get in touch with me so that you can get your blue light glasses anywhere you are in the world. It's actually a free. Now, let's go back to this tool we have been using, a do while loop, to solve this problem. So here, we first said we have our int I equal to 0, and it's going to do all of this while I is less than 5. Inside the do while loop, we have another do while loop, and this do while loop is going to print star. Record that we are going to print star. It's going to print star, and after printing star, it's going to increment j. So this j is going to turn from 0 to 1 after printing star. This is going to continue to print star as long as j is less than 5. And after j is less than 5, once this condition is satisfied, it will print out a new line and then increment I. So I will turn to 1 and it will repeat the process again. So that's the same thing we just did using a for loop. Using a do while loop, this is how you would have done it. Which one looks to be a better tool? Many people would say the for loop. And if you say the for loop, I totally agree with you because it's less lines of code and a little much more straightforward. Although this is still very straightforward and easy to explain, at first it looks vague and really, really complicated. And so when you're writing codes, if you see two methods, please go for the simple one. Because good codes are easy to read. You want to read them. You want to look at the logic and the rest. But if you have a really complicated code, nobody wants to look at something like that. All right. I hope you're getting the hang of how nested loop works and how we use tools such as nested loops to solve problems. Now let's look at another problem we may have. This is a square of stars 5 times. And we say we'll use a nested for loop or a nested do while loop. And in the comment section, you can tell me which one is actually better for you. Now, let's say we want to print out this star 5 times again. We want to make some kind of tweaks. Remember this thing we first did in our C for Absolute Beginners Part 1, this right angle. We've been working with stars, right? So let's continue that program with star. Let's print out this right angle with a star 5 times. So let's do something like this. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A right angle 5 times. How would you solve this problem? At this point, you can now start thinking within yourself, how would I solve this problem? Yes, look at the problems. No clues given, but you've learned about tools such as do while loop, nested do while loop, nested for loop. What would be a better way? What would be the best option and a simple option for you to solve a problem like this? So you can really start thinking what would be a good way to solve a problem like this. You can pause this video and think about it. That's the learning. Your thinking is the learning. The real coding is just a product of your thinking. And if you're not thinking but you're coding, it means that, something is wrong somewhere, because you're not coming up with any process, but you're getting the answers. So it means that that person is using an external source. But if you continue to use this external source, you will not be solving any problem. You will just be copying the solution that someone gave for its own problem. So it's high time you start thinking about the thought process. So when you go to Google, when you want to search out things, don't search for the solutions. Instead, we want to look at things that could give you clues, steps on what to do. The real solution should be for you. Solve it yourself. Do it yourself. Own your learning. So I assume you must have thoughts about how to fix a problem like this. And, well, let's do it together. That's the reason why we are learning. So let's say something like next loop 1.c, a file I've created before, and let's press enter now. Okay, it seems like looking at this from here may be really confusing as it were. So let's create a new file and let's call this new file.c. And in your thought process to solve your problem, I know that you must have thought that you will first of all include your header file and have your main function where you are going to write all your codes in. Well, if this was how you began your thought process, you're completely correct. So we want to print out something like this. We've done this. Now we want to do this. This and this, are they similar? Yes. See, if I just remove this, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So do you see what we are doing? Rather than printing out a star, all of them, we are going 1, 2, 3, 4. So depending on the loop we are looking at is where we are printing. So if we are in our first loop, we'll print out 1. If we're in our second loop, we'll print out 2. If we're in our third loop, we'll print out 3. If we're in our fourth loop, print out 4. And if we're in our fifth loop, we print out 5. That's the biggest difference between this and having to do something like this. Because in this one, all we are doing is whether we are in our first loop or second loop or third loop, we want to continue to print out 5. Right? That's what we are doing here. But here, we are simply saying if we are in our first loop, print out 1. If we are in our second loop, print out 2. If we're in our third loop, print out 3. If we're in our fourth loop, print out 4. And if we're in our fifth loop, print out 5. Turns out there are a couple of ways we can do this. But if you always follow my tutorials, if you always follow any of my classes, you would recall that there's something really, really common with me. I look for the simplest yet most efficient and effective method to solve this problem. So let's continue using a nested loop to print out something like this. This is what we want to print out. How do we do that? Since most people would prefer a for loop, now let's start with the for loop. So we can have int I equal to 0. And we have I less than 5. Because the row we want to print out is 5. And as long as I is less than 5, we want to increment I. This is our first for loop. We're not going to have a for loop inside a for loop. So we have something like this. We're going to end it. And inside this for loop, we're now going to have another for loop for int j. You could call it anything you like. You could call this A, you could call it B, you could call it anything. You could call it in j equal to 0. Now j less than 5. Want to do something? J plus plus. And in here, we can now have our printf statement. And print out a star. And lastly, we can have a new line statement. So that for every 5 times it's print out, we can go to the next line. Would this work? If you said yes, it would work. You would in fact be saying we'll do exactly the same thing we've done previously. So let me run this. I will soon show you why I decided to do it this way. And a dot out. This is exactly what we have. This is exactly the same thing we've been doing. Printing out 5 times is square 5 times. So if I was to solve this problem, the first thing I would do was to print out a square 5 times first. And then after printing out a square 5 times, I'm now going to start thinking of how to do this program so that in its first loop is we print out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, just like that. I don't know if you get. First things is to do what I've done. You know, these things build on each other. So if you don't understand 1 and you're going to 2, you would not understand 2 also. So first, I would make sure that I personally understand how to print out these kind of squares. The normal square first. But I'll make sure I understand how to print out. After understanding how to print out squares like that, you know, this kind of normal square. After understanding this, I will now think, how do I modify this code in such a way that it's print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so let's do that thinking together. We said for I equal to 0. Now, as long as I is less than 5, we want to increment I plus plus. Now, for j equal to 0, as long as j is less than 5, how about we do this? As long as j is less than I. As long as j is less than or equal to I. So as long as j is less than or equal to this variable here, not 5 again, no. As long as j is less than or equal to this up variable, I want to go out and print star. Let's run this. Let's see. And let's compile, and here we go. We have 1, we have 2, we have 3, we have 4, and we have 5. Is it clear? Let me remove our spaces so that, and let's run this again. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what just happened? Remember how the for loop work? A for loop, the first one, as long as I is equal to 0 and 0 is less than 5, I want to go to this next one. So in J is saying as long as J is equal to 0, yeah, as long as J is less than or equal to I in this case was 0. As long as J is less than or equal to I, so what here is simply saying is as long as J is less than or equal to, as long as J is less than or equal to 0, because I in its first loop was 0. As long as J is less than or equal to 0, because I is 0, I want to go ahead and print out a star. I want to go ahead and print out a star. Then we increment plus plus. When we increment, it comes back. We now print out a new line and it comes back to this loop because we are done with the first one. So I now turns to 1. So I turns to 1. So is 1 less than 5? Yes, it goes again. As long as J is equal to 0. As long as J is less than or equal to, I has turned to 1. So it's now prints 0 and 1. That's 2. 0 and 1 in the next line. Just like that. So it's still the same thing. It's just a matter of you thinking, what do I change? Which logic? What do I need to do here? You know, we've always said this. It's about problem solving. You know, we've always said that it's about problem solving. It's not about writing codes. It's about thinking to solve problems. Just like in every other thing you do in life, you have to think to solve a problem. For example, let's say I pick up this phone and I wanted to on it, and this phone starts hanging. Immediately I pick it up. No, for now it's not hanging. You can see it running very fast. But let's say it starts to hang, and this is your phone. How are you going to solve this problem? Okay, so you may think of a way. You may say, restart the device. You could say, okay, let's off the internet connection, the data. You could say, okay, free some apps. That's you thinking on how to stop your phone from hanging. Or you could say, this phone has started developing some kind of technical fault. So let me give it to someone who is going to repair it. Those are thought process. In the same way, your codes, all you have to do when solving these problems, rather than write code, is to think. Do I take it to Google, the technical guy? Do I think more? There's something I've learned that can help me solve this problem. So it's just about you thinking. You always have to think to find solutions to problem. And as you're thinking, you're always going to be using your eyes to look at it. So like these blue light glasses, very, very important. Something you should take very, very seriously. It has no side effects. It does not give you headache and the rest. If your blue light glass is giving you headache, giving you any form of inconvenience, it means that probably that's a wrong glass for you. This one feels so natural. So if you want to get it from the person I get mine from, free delivery to any parts in the world that you are in, whether in or out of Nigeria, you can simply send me a message. And so this was how to do this problem with a for loop, right? Let's look at how to do it with a do while. Let's look at how to do it with a do while loop. So let's look at this code next. Loop while 1.c, and this would have been how to do it with a do while loop. The same thing, the same principle. Why j is less than or equal to I, want to do some certain condition as long as I is less than 5. So here int I is equal to 1, we also declare int j. So here we said j is equal to 1. Now it's going to do some certain conditions. So it's going to printf star and increments j. Why j is less than I. So j, as long as it's less than I, is going to do this. We'll print out a new line. And lastly, once I is more than 5, is going to end the process. If we should run this code, it will give us exactly the same output like the first one gave to us. All right, so running this GCC next while loop the 1 gives us the same output. But in the spirit of problem solving, you understand how to do this with a for loop, right? Even if you don't understand the do while loop, because of how big and complex the syntax loop, which in reality is not even complex. But you understand how to do it with a for loop, right? If you understand how to do it with a for loop, then do something. This is what we've been doing so far. This is what we've been doing so far. You know, we just press enter and it will give us 5. We want the user to tell us how many we want to print. We want the user to be the one to tell us how many we want to print. So how do you do that? Oh, this is a do while loop. You can also do it with a do while loop. You know, but we want the user to tell us what to print. We want the user to tell us what to print. So let's use a for loop that you are much more conversant with. And how would you do that? How would you do that? Well, I'm sure you're thinking about how to do that. And the process are pretty simple. So if you want the user to tell you, use the printf function and use the scanf function to get the user input. So if you are going to get the user input, you have to store it in a variable. Automatically, you are going to have a third variable. I don't know if that's clear. So far, we've been working with 2 variables. Let's look at my code again. So it's I and it's j, just 2 variables. But if we are going to get the user input, we have to store that input somewhere, and that would be our third variable. So we'll now have something like printf. You know, we are just prompting the user for something. Enter the number of rows you want. This is a prompt with printf for something. Right now, you're going to use scanf to get the whatever the user has done. So %d. So you have to store these results in a variable. Let's call this variable rows. And for you to be able to call this variable, you have to define it somewhere. So it turns out up here, we'll just have to define in rows. You can set it equal to 0, you know, or you could just leave it like this, rows, like I would do. So now we've gotten the user's inputs, we've stored it somewhere. How do we use it in our for loop? So far, what has been the inputs we are working with? We've been working with 5 as the inputs, right? Just 5 as the inputs. So if we want to get the input from the user now, instead of having 5, we'll have this variable called rows. I don't know if you get that. So far, the only thing that's been telling us how many to print out is this variable called, is this number called 5. So for us to now get the user's input, we'll change that 5 to rows. So if the user type anything in rows, it would be a number here. So we have rows. Then basically that's the only line. Let's try to compile this and see what happens. All right. We have an error. So let's go and fix our errors. Oops. Turns out in our printf statement, done something we are not supposed to do. And yes. This would have given us a problem. Okay. All right, now I can compile that and let's run that. Enter the number of rows you want. I want 5 rows. It's print out 5 for me. Okay, so I'm the user and I want 10 rows. It gives me 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I'm the user and I want 1 row. Print out 1. I want 2, print out 2. Let's say I want 100. Hey, print out 100. You can see how big 100 rows are. So you see how you can get inputs from the user now, right? So very simple. Now a problem for you. A very simple problem. A very simple challenge. That's just think for like 30 seconds and you get it. Assuming I don't want to print out star here, but I want to print out numbers. So I want to print out something like this. Oops. Enter the number to define rows, and I want to print out 5. And it should print out 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How would you do this? Now let's say I want 7, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How do you do that? It's really, really, really simple. And just using what we've done so far, you can understand what we are doing. We just add a printf d, and what we are printing is k, number of rows. So the only difference we are doing now is just to add a printf d, like %d for digit, and then the d that it's going to get is going to be k, which is the number of rows. So let's look at that, our first program, right? This one where we've gotten the user input. So all we have to do now is to remove this star, put our %d, come here and look at the variable we are going to work with, variable j. So as long as j is less than I, it's going to print out j plus this. Now let's compile this and run it. And let's compile this. GCC and a.out. Enter the number of rows you want. 7. Have 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's because I started from 0. So you could imagine if I had changed this to be 1, right? If I change this to be 1 and here 1, 2, everything now make a whole lot of sense. All right. 7, we have 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the rest. Okay, we have a small problem here. This one have not been changed. Oops. Yes, where our problem is coming from. So you always have problems like this. Always. Always, always, always. Now let's compile this. Need 6. Then we have 6. We need 7. We have 7. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Once again, how did we do that? We just, so that it won't start from 0, we change these variables to 1, and we said for I less than or equal to rows, go ahead. I hope this was clear enough. If it's not clear enough, not to worry. Not to worry at all. You can continue learning like this, bit by bit, and slowly but surely it will become clearer. But you want to start with something as simple as building static, and then from static to functional and dynamic web pages. Then you could send me a message there. Let me know that you're interested in learning for the next 3 months on a one-on-one how to build these dynamic websites, so that you start from there and everything will now build in again onto this software engineering. You can continue to do the two at the same time, and the software engineering and the web. You can do multiple things at the same time. It's about your determination and the amount of time. I put a lot of time in doing this video, and if you benefited from this video, please kindly leave a comment, like the video, and share the video on every platform: Slack, social media, Facebook, your WhatsApp status, everywhere. Please share this video. The effort you put in there to share it, to tell others about this video, is a way to tell me thank you. I so much appreciate every effort you put in. Thank you so much. My name is Bright Daniel from B-Wave ICT, and I'll see you in the next